What if your memories weren't truly yours? What if every emotion, fear, love, sorrow was planted, to keep you from remembering who you really are? In this story, we follow Elira, a neuroscientist who begins to see a spiral pattern in the minds of her patients. But as she dives deeper, she doesn't just uncover a hidden memory, she unlocks an ancient system. A loop. A forgotten truth buried across 9 failed versions of humanity. This is not just about aliens. It's about the architecture of consciousness. It's about what happens when one soul remembers too much and dares to break the cycle. Are we truly free, or just a beautiful repetition? Stay with us. You're about to enter the spiral, and once you do, you may never forget again. She didn't notice it at first. Not until the 4th patient, maybe the 5th. In the beginning, it was background noise, scribbles on dream journals, vague sketches from half-lucid minds. But then it appeared again. And again. Always the same, a spiral of 9 concentric rings, etched in gold, spinning inward like time collapsing into itself. And at its heart an eye. Still. Watching. Without lid or expression, yet filled with a presence so overwhelming that even its silence seemed to speak. Dr. Elira Vaughn had studied dreams for 17 years. She had mapped the contours of nightmare like a cartographer of the unconscious, charting patterns, cataloging metaphors, decoding symbols passed through generations. But this wasn't metaphor. This was intrusion. The dreams came from all over: a boy in Kyoto who couldn't sleep without drawing the spiral on his bedroom wall, his fingers raw from repetition. A nun in Poland who saw the eye behind her eyelids every time she prayed. An inmate in Arizona who claimed it spoke to him and told him secrets from before his birth. They were not connected by geography, by culture, by belief. And yet they all described the same thing. They called it the Watcher Beneath, though none could explain why they knew that name. At first, Elira dismissed it as a global psychological contagion. Perhaps a meme, a thought virus spreading quietly through modern media, infecting the suggestible. But the deeper she looked, the more impossible it became. One woman, blind since birth, painted the spiral in perfect symmetry. A child who had never learned to write scrawled runes around the eye that linguists could not decipher. And most unsettling of all, several of her patients had, in their altered states, spoken her name. Not Dr. Vaughn. Not Elira. But Elira Nkai. That name had never existed anywhere in her life. Not in books. Not in dreams. And yet when she heard it, something twitched in her gut. Not fear. Not recognition. Something older. Like a lock shifting in its sleep, deep beneath the floor of her mind. And then came the man from Iceland. 42 years old. Near drowning incident. No known psychological issues. He arrived at her facility under sedation, eyes moving behind shut lids, whispering in tongues. As she monitored his EEG, the machine began to spike unnaturally, but not with chaos. With rhythm. A slow, repeating pulse. Like language. Like chant. He woke at 2:09 a.m., sat up, and looked straight at the camera. "She carries it," he said. "The 9th seal." The lights flickered. He turned his head slowly, as if searching for her through the glass wall, and said again, but this time in that other voice, the one layered with echo, heavy with memory not his own. "You were there, Elira. You were sealed beside us when the first light fell." The security footage would later show his pupils were not round. They were slits. Vertical. And golden. The dreams had changed. Not just for her patients but for Elira. Now, When she closed her eyes, she no longer saw the spiral floating alone in the void. It had shape. It had weight. And it was listening. It began 3 nights after the Icelandic patient spoke her name. She drifted into sleep with the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest, and found herself standing in a wide, black plain, smooth, endless, like polished obsidian stretching into a sky that held no stars. The spiral hovered above her head, immense and glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with something not her own heartbeat. Then the singing began. Not from a voice. From many. Hundreds. No, thousands. She turned, and saw them, rows upon rows of silent figures, standing in a perfect circle around the spiral's base, as if awaiting something. Their mouths were open, but no sound emerged. And yet the sound was everywhere, a harmonic, resonant frequency that made her bones feel soft and her lungs feel shallow. It was not music. It was command. She tried to speak, to move, to wake, but her body would not listen. Her arms hung at her sides. Her feet sank slightly into the black soil. And behind the walls of song, she heard something deeper, a whisper underneath the harmony, like a second voice crawling inside the first. It spoke in the language she had never learned. And she understood it. The others failed. You were the last memory left awake. Now, come back to the center. Her body moved without command. Forward. Into the spiral. She awoke gasping, her pillow soaked in sweat, her hands trembling violently. The EEG machine she wore out of caution had recorded her brain activity during the dream. But what it showed made her stomach twist, a sudden drop in neural frequency, not a spike, as if her consciousness had stopped for 14.2 seconds. No dream state behaves like that. No human brain survives that pattern without coma. And yet she was awake. And her ears were still ringing. She played back the audio captured from the room that night. In the middle of the file, for precisely 14 seconds, the microphone recorded something. A tone. Low. Inhuman. Not machine hum. Not radio interference. A vibration like a song stretched across space. She sent the file to an astrophysicist friend under a false name. A week later, he called her in the middle of the night. His voice was panicked, his breathing uneven. "Where the hell did you get that?" he demanded. Why? "Because I've heard it before," he whispered. "It's on the Voyager recordings. From the deep space plasma fields past Saturn. It shouldn't exist in your room. It shouldn't exist inside your brain." Elira hung up. She didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. But the 4th night, it didn't matter whether she wanted to or not. Sleep took her. And this time, the choir was closer. She could see their faces now. They were human mostly. But their eyes were empty. Not blind. Scrubbed. They sang without sound. And in their silence, they screamed. One turned to her. Its mouth opened wider than it should, jaw unhinging like soft clay. It stared into her, and Elira felt the exact moment her spine refused to move. Not from fear, from recognition. It was her. The face was hers. Not similar. Identical. But older. Grayer. Empty. The silent choir wasn't a dream. It was a memory. A place where pieces of consciousness were stored like echoes. A choir of past versions, waiting, dormant, until the next cycle began again. And she, this version of her, had just heard the song meant to bring them back. The morning after the 4th dream, Elira didn't go to work. Her office sat empty, her patience unanswered. She sat instead at the foot of her bed, fingers still trembling from the vision. Her phone vibrated 5 times. She didn't pick up. There was only one thing she could think about: the face in the crowd. The one that had looked like her, but older. Weathered. Hollowed out from the inside. Was that a trick of the subconscious? A symbol of fear? Or was it something more literal? She opened the voice file from the EEG recording again and played the tone, that low, humming frequency she had heard in the dream. It didn't sound like music anymore. It sounded like breathing. Long, slow, mechanical breathing that echoed through space. Her eyes were drawn to the waveform on her laptop screen. It wasn't chaotic. It had structure. Peaks and valleys that repeated, not randomly, but in a pattern. She cross-referenced it with every sound database she had access to: earthquake pulses, animal echolocation, even mechanical engine noise. Nothing matched. Until she tried the NASA logs. Specifically, Voyager's golden record, the one launched in 1977 to communicate with alien civilizations. She loaded the signal overlays into a spectral analyzer. The tone from her dream matched a frequency embedded in the deep space plasma recordings from the Helios Heath, far beyond the reach of Earth's magnetosphere. That region, they said, was silent. But the waveform said otherwise. She stared at the screen for hours, refusing to blink, trying to convince herself it was a coincidence. But the final proof came at 2:16 a.m. She had fallen asleep again. Not voluntarily. She had taken sleeping pills, hoping to force a dreamless void. It didn't work. She woke up standing in the middle of her apartment, staring at the mirror. Only this wasn't her reflection. The woman in the mirror wasn't moving. She was frozen, eyes locked forward, lips parted as if about to scream, but no sound came out. Elira touched the glass. It was not cold. It pulsed. Warmth. Like skin. And behind her reflection, she saw them again. The silent choir. But this time, they were inside the mirror. Dozens of them, pressed against the boundary like ghosts behind water. And they were all her. Different versions, some smiling, some sobbing, some with mouths stretched far too wide, some without eyes at all. Each version was marked with the same spiral etched faintly on their foreheads, like a scar of identity. And they began to move in sync. Not fast. Just a slow, circular motion spinning. Her chest tightened. The spiral was no longer just a symbol. It was a command. She turned to run. Her feet wouldn't move. Her body was no longer listening. The air grew heavier. The lights in her apartment dimmed until only the glow from her laptop remained, and then even that flickered. Every sound in the world vanished, not silence, but the absence of reality. And in that stillness, a voice returned. Not loud. Not angry. Just, present. Do you see them now? Elira couldn't answer. Her jaw felt locked. The reflection began to melt. Her skin rippled in the mirror like liquid gold, and behind it another eye emerged. Massive. Shaped like the spiral itself. It looked at her through the mirror, but not at her eyes. It was looking through her skull, through her mind, through time. And then, like 1,000 knives scraping metal, she heard their voices again. Not just from the mirror. From the walls. The floor. Inside her own ears. You are the echo. You are the continuation. The others forgot. You remembered. And for that, they will come for you. Elira collapsed. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was normal. Her apartment was quiet, but her hands were shaking, and her ears bled faintly from both sides. And scrawled across her wall, in the same golden spiral pattern she had seen in her dream, were the words: Memory 9, incomplete. Restoration in progress. She had not written them. She did not own gold paint. And she could feel it now, a pressure beneath her skin, like a second version of herself crawling toward the surface. 3 days passed, but Elira didn't sleep. She couldn't. Every time her eyes drifted shut, the world behind her lid surged back with inhuman clarity, not in images, but in sound. Words she couldn't understand throbbed at the base of her skull. The syllables were wrong. The rhythm was wrong. They were too old. Too heavy. Like they belonged to something that didn't breathe air. On the fourth night, the voices stopped echoing. They aligned. And they spoke. Not through ears, but directly into her mind. The message wasn't long, just 4 words, repeated again and again. Unlock the 9th seal. She didn't know what it meant, but her body did. Her hands moved on their own, scribbling the phrase over and over into her notebook until the page bled ink like veins. She stared at the markings. They weren't English anymore. They weren't any language she knew. And yet, staring at them too long made her nauseous, like her brain was bending, not from meaning, but from memory. The next morning, she emailed her notes to an old contact, Professor Matthias Elter, a retired linguist who specialized in extinct proto-languages. She didn't explain where the symbols came from. Just a single sentence. Tell me if this is human. He responded in less than 2 hours. Where did you find this? It's a composite. Partial Ugaritic, fragments of pre-Sumerian, and something I can't even match. But that's not the strange part. Elira, some of the phonetic roots here shouldn't exist. They're structured like programming code, but not binary. Organic code. This isn't language. It's instruction. Her blood ran cold. That night, the voices returned, but now, they waited. Silent. Anticipating. She set a voice recorder beside her bed, desperate to catch anything that would confirm she wasn't losing her mind. What she captured nearly broke her. At 3:33 a.m., the waveform shifted violently, not like speech, but like a sudden drop into another signal. One that hadn't come through the microphone. It was like her body became the transmitter. A low, guttural tone filled the room, layered with whispers in languages that didn't follow any known structure. But in the background, beneath it all, a clear phrase surfaced in her own voice. The archive is beneath the skin. She played it back 10 times. It was unmistakably her. But she had never said those words. Later, she noticed a scar just above her left hip, one she didn't remember having. A line no longer than a matchstick, perfectly straight, and warm to the touch. Pressing it sent a tremor up her spine, and in that moment, for a split second, the world flickered. The walls of her apartment vanished. She stood in a circular chamber made of stone that pulsed like flesh. Symbols drifted across its walls, glowing with golden light, then fading like dying stars. And at the center of the chamber, a sphere floated, cracked open like an egg and filled with words that burned as they moved. They weren't written. They were alive. The moment ended as fast as it came. But Elira had seen it. Felt it. And one thing was now clear. The language wasn't invented. It had been implanted. And not just in her, in all of humanity. It was the boot code of consciousness. Something designed, injected, and then hidden waiting for activation. And now, it had begun. The tremor began in her left hand. Subtle. Barely noticeable. A small twitch between the knuckles, like a pulse too close to the skin. She thought it was stress, lack of sleep, the residual shock of what she'd seen, what she had heard. But by the third day, the twitch had spread. Her shoulder. Her neck. Her eyelids. Then, her dreams changed again. No longer abstract. No longer drifting symbols and spirals. This time, they were anatomical. She stood inside a neural web vast and pulsing, suspended in blackness, each strand of the network glowing with faint blue electricity. She moved between the synapses like a ghost, untethered, weightless. At the center of it all was something massive, a brain, not human, not even biological in the way she understood. It was shaped like a sphere with millions of hexagonal plates shifting on its surface. And inside it, a beating light. When she reached for it, her vision snapped. She was no longer in the dream. She was standing in her apartment again, except the room had duplicated itself. 2 couches. 2 lamps. 2 shadows. 2 of her. One version stood across the room, mirroring her posture exactly. Same expression. Same clothes. But something was off. The eyes. They didn't blink. They didn't follow the light. They watched her like a predator mimicking prey. When she moved, it moved. When she raised her hand, it did too. But a second slower. She whispered, "What are you?" The reflection whispered back, "What were you?" Her knees buckled. As she fell, the mirror self stepped forward, breaking the illusion of reflection, walking through the air like water. And in that moment, Elira felt her neurons fire with a new pattern, one she didn't generate. One that didn't originate in her skull. Her EEG would later reveal it, a second brainwave signature, nested like a parasite within her own. Mirrored. Not opposite, older. She regained consciousness 5 hours later, lying on her floor, eyes open, but paralyzed. Not from trauma. From intrusion. Her body was being studied. From the inside. The next morning, she went to the lab. She hooked herself up to the same neural scanners used on her patients, something she had never dared do before. The machine pulsed, read her baseline, and then froze. Then it displayed 2 images. One a normal scan of human brain activity. The second her current scan. And at the center of her prefrontal cortex, something new. A structure that didn't belong. It looked like a neural growth, but denser. Fractal. Perfectly symmetrical. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat, except not every heartbeat. Only every 9th. She stared at the anomaly. The shape wasn't random. She recognized it from the dreams. A spiral of 9 points. But then came the voice. Not out loud. From the machine itself. "You are sinking. Do not resist." The machine shut down. The lab's power surged. Lights burst. Glass cracked. When she turned around, her reflection in the monitor didn't move. And then very slowly it smiled. Not the smile of reassurance. The smile of something ancient finally waking up. And then it whispered in a language not meant for human tongues. 9 has remembered. You are no longer singular. That night, Elira's hands stopped trembling. Because they were no longer hers. Sleep was no longer rest. It was entry. Each night, Elira fell not into unconsciousness, but into a chamber, deep and silent, beneath anything she could recognize as dream. It was not built. It was grown walls made of something between bone and crystal, pulsing faintly with light that felt alive. Gravity was wrong here. She floated, but downward. Time bled sideways. And in the center of this place, carved into the flesh of the floor, was a map. Not a map of places. A map of minds. 9 spirals, arranged like constellations. Each one marked with tiny shifting symbols that blinked and reformed whenever she looked too long. They weren't fixed. They responded to her thoughts. She realized, with cold certainty, that this was no hallucination. This map was reading her back. At the center of the spirals was a single word. She could not pronounce it, but she knew it. It pulsed through her jaw, burned in her teeth, echoed behind her eyes. Not language. Not sound. Recognition. Sonrai. She whispered it in her sleep. In the real world, her voice recorder caught the word 3 times, each time with a second voice layered beneath her own. Deep. Metallic. Perfectly synchronized. She traced the spirals with her fingers in the dream. As her hand passed over one, a vision burst into her brain like a scream underwater, a civilization of beings not human, thin, tall, silver-veined, standing in silence as a great orb descended from the sky, hollow and alive, splitting open to reveal them. Not gods. Not invaders. Architects. They had come not to conquer, but to seed. Consciousness. Awareness. And control. Elira snapped awake in her bed, choking, her skin cold and wet with sweat. Her hands were covered in dirt. Real dirt. Soil. Clay. Under her fingernails. But she hadn't left her apartment. She staggered into the bathroom, turned on the light and froze. Someone had drawn on her mirror again. But not in gold. This time, it was etched into the glass from the inside. Dozens of symbols the same from the spiral map carved perfectly, as if by laser. In the center, one phrase in crude English. She has touched the root. She ran to her desk, grabbed her notebook, flipped to the last page. She remembered writing on it was blank. But as she held the pen, her hand moved on its own. Fast. Frenzied. She wasn't drawing. She was downloading. The map appeared again line by line exactly as she had seen it. She didn't have this kind of memory. She didn't need to. The memory wasn't hers. She had become the vessel. Her phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. No name. No contact. Just a single sentence. Do not show the map, or they will come. She stared at the phone as her apartment lights flickered again, humming faintly, matching the same deep tone from her dream. And then, everything stopped. Not just the hum. Not just the lights. Time itself paused. The rain outside the window froze in midair. The sound of the city vanished. And from the corner of the room, not through the door, not through the wall, but from between seconds, something stepped through. Tall. Featureless. Its skin shimmered like wet ash. No face. But she felt it looking directly into the deepest chamber of her mind. Her voice failed. Her muscles locked. It pointed to the map. Then, to her. Then vanished. The air returned like a rush of ocean. The room gasped around her. The rain resumed. The city noise snapped back to life. But she didn't move. Because now, she knew. The map wasn't just a guide. It was a memory structure. A path not across space but across cycles of evolution. 9 spirals. 9 attempts. And hers was the 9th. The dreams no longer waited for night. Elira stood in the elevator of her research facility at 2:37 p.m., eyes open, heart steady, when the shift happened sudden, silent, like glass cracking underwater. The floor beneath her vanished. The world blinked. And when she opened her eyes, she was no longer standing in the elevator. She was deep underground. Stone walls pulsed faintly with veins of green light, like oxygen running through the lungs of something ancient. The air was thick not with heat, but with memory. It had weight. Density. Like breathing the dust of a civilization buried before time was measured. Ahead of her stood a doorway not built, but grown. Its frame curled like roots, its arch marked by the same spiral of 9 that haunted her sleep. She stepped through. And the air sang. Not with music. With data. Frequencies hummed around her like the ghost of a forgotten language, carrying emotions that didn't belong to her: sorrow, awe, terror, awe again, an endless cycling of sensation as if she were feeling someone else's extinction. The chamber before her stretched wide, and at its center, floating above a pedestal of black glass, was a sphere. It shimmered with patterns that moved faster than thought, every line a sentence, every glow a fragment of history. She approached. Her presence activated it. The floor beneath her flickered. And then she saw them. Version 8. Millions of figures stood in rows, unmoving, frozen in mid-motion. They were human mostly, but their faces were longer, their bodies taller, their skin pale like stone soaked in starlight. Each one bore a faint spiral mark on the back of their neck, pulsing softly. They were perfectly preserved, not dead. Stored. Frozen at the moment of final transmission. She walked among them. No footsteps. No air. Time here was not real. The archive had removed it. She touched one of them, a woman, eyes wide in terror, mouth half open. And then Elira felt it all. A city burning. Skies cracking open. The architects returning, but not as creators. As harvesters. Version 8 had advanced too far. They had decoded too much. They had reached the edge of the seal, and tried to open it. The punishment was immediate. They were wiped not by violence but by silence. A frequency, deep and perfect, sang across their world and put them all to sleep in a single breath. Not a scream. A song. The same tone Elira had heard in her dreams. She stumbled back, gasping, and the archive pulsed. One word appeared across the sphere's surface, written in golden bloodlight. Terminated. Another line followed. Current version, 9. Error detected. Memory leak. Convergence imminent. She wasn't just seeing the past. She was seeing a system log. A system of iterations. Each version a test. Each failure archived. Elira looked down at her own hands. They were glowing. Slowly, faintly, but unmistakably with the same light as the figures around her. A part of her had begun to sync with the archive. She was being recognized not as a visitor. As a node. She was becoming part of it. A voice not external, not internal, but ambient filled the chamber like an ocean pushing through stone. Your version is unstable. Extraction pending. Reseed scheduled. Her heart screamed. Her body wouldn't respond. She tried to back away from the sphere, but her feet didn't touch the floor anymore. Gravity had changed. She was being pulled not downward, but inward toward the center of the archive. She reached out, screamed. The air collapsed around her. And she woke up. Back in the elevator. 37 floors had passed. But only 2 seconds had gone by. The door dinged. She stepped out, knees weak, the skin on her palms marked by spirals burned into her flesh. They hadn't been there before. And the archive had not been a dream. It had been a reconnection. And now it knew where she was. She didn't remember falling asleep. But she remembered waking up, somewhere not meant for eyes. There was no sky. No ground. No up. No down. Just a field infinite, reflective, rippling like black mercury under invisible wind. Elira floated above it, body numb, mind sharpened. She wasn't dreaming. She was accessing something, or it was accessing her. Then she saw it. Above the field, suspended in empty light, spun a structure too perfect to be natural, too organic to be artificial. A sphere made of strands like nerves, like wires, like roots made of pure thought. It breathed. Not air, but emotion. With every inhale, it pulled the fear from her body. With every exhale, it replaced it with something worse: understanding. She realized she was looking at the blueprint of consciousness. The original template. A design. Not random. Not evolved. Architected. It moved. And in that movement, Elira saw herself. But not just her. Thousands of versions, different timelines, different expressions, different fates. All blinking in and out like stars being born and swallowed again. And above them, etched into the code itself, was the pattern that started it all, the 9 spirals. But now, she saw what they really were. They were locks. She was inside the 9th. And something beneath it was still sealed. The blueprint opened. Each strand curled back like petals. In its center was a core of memory, raw and ancient, like liquid gold and ash. And within that memory, a scream began. Not of pain. Not of rage. A scream of awakening. She felt it burst through her, a rush of images and thoughts that weren't hers but felt like they had always been, a planet swallowed by light, beings of pure energy torn into thought, children born with no mouths but endless minds, an entire civilization devouring itself to become one god mind, the first to try and evolve beyond memory. They failed. And that failure became us. Human emotion, love, sorrow, desire, fear, they weren't byproducts of evolution. They were containers. Sentient buffers. Each emotion locked away fragments of that failed memory, hiding it in individual vessels. Elira had been leaking for years. So had millions. Each time someone cried without reason, dreamt of stars they'd never seen, felt grief for things that hadn't happened, it was the memory trying to return. The blueprint knew this. It had been trying to reset. But something in Elira's mind, her exact neural signature, had broken the rhythm. She was not just recalling it. She was rewriting it. That was why they were coming. The architects did not fear humanity. They feared what happened when one version remembered enough to reject the blueprint. Elira felt the sphere pulse faster. Lines of light shot into her skin. She screamed as her body lit up from the inside out. Her thoughts were no longer thoughts. They were instructions. Her tears were no longer water. They were code. Her voice fractured, echoing 9 times at once. I am not one. I am the memory that disobeys. The blueprint shook. She had triggered something. A fracture. A release. A rewrite. Suddenly, the field of liquid blackness cracked wide, and beneath it was not ground, but a mouth. It opened. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. A mouth the size of a moon, full of golden teeth, each tooth an entire failed version of humanity. And from that mouth came a word, spoken in every language, every timeline, every dream simultaneously. Recede. Then silence. Then collapse. Elira woke up on her floor. Her apartment was gone. The walls had turned to liquid symbols. The ceiling was sky. Her bed a table made of circuitry and bone. The air smelled like ozone and old skin. Her hands pulsed with light. The blueprint was now inside her. And in the mirror, her reflection didn't look back. It looked out. And it whispered, "You are not Elira. You are the architect of failure. Ultimate Pro Max, fracture of self edition." The voice didn't arrive like thunder. It didn't echo like a god. It slid. It slid between her thoughts, quiet, oily, slow. Like an idea she almost remembered but was too afraid to think. It didn't speak in sound. It was soundlessness, dressed in shape. And the first words that formed were hers. "I want to leave." But they weren't her desire. They were permission. It began in her fingertips. Each one tingled as if kissed by static, but deeper inside the bone. Her nerves fired without her will, tracing symbols into the air that glowed only to her. Ancient characters spiraled outward, hanging in the room like dust caught in gravity that wasn't gravity. Her breath caught. She wasn't breathing oxygen anymore. She was breathing data. Memory compressed into vapor, sinking through her lungs and flowering into thoughts she had never lived. She saw herself on other planets. Dying. Awakening. Destroying. Being destroyed. Each life a version. Each version another Elira. Another seed. And the whisper returned. "You are not singular. You are not real. You are recursion." She screamed without opening her mouth. The walls around her flickered, not flickering light, but flickering truth. Her apartment bled into a canyon of stars. Her furniture fractured into bone and ash. A desk became an altar. A chair became a cocoon. Her bed the operating table where the first humans were written. Her heartbeat slowed. Not out of peace. Out of replacement. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm not hers. The body still looked like Elira. But the mind was being rewritten. You were born because the others died. You exist to carry the fracture forward. You remember because you were designed to. She fell to her knees as the spiral symbols lit up on her arms burned into the skin by thought alone. They weren't marks of identity. They were access keys. And something had just logged in. Inside her skull, images raced faster than thought, the first breath of the first prototype, the scream of the second as it rejected the code, the silence of the third, the collapse of the fourth, the fire of the fifth, the echo of the sixth, the betrayal of the seventh, the arrogance of the eighth, and now, her. The ninth. The whisper laughed. But not in joy. In relief. Finally, one who remembers the pain but does not flee it. You are the gate. Not to knowledge. To judgment. The room collapsed. Not in destruction, in integration. Every wall, every corner, folded into itself, layer by layer, until space was no longer space but a pressure, pressing against her soul. She closed her eyes. Opened them. Found herself on a cliff, black stone above a sea of screams, stars frozen in mid-death. And rising from the ocean of unbeing was a tower, made of skulls not human, but nearly. Each one blinked. Each one knew her name. Atop that tower stood a figure. Faceless. Towering. Its limbs folded in ways that mocked biology. It didn't move. It waited. And the whisper was no longer inside her head. It stood before her. You are the ninth convergence. The final bloom. And your decision has already been made. She spoke through cracked lips. Her voice, barely her own. What decision? The whisper stepped closer. To remember, Elira. You have already chosen to remember. She collapsed again. Not physically. Conceptually. Her mind shattered into its original components: will, instinct, logic, emotion. Each floated in front of her, glowing orbs of raw self. The whisper offered her a hand of darkness, holding a seed of light. Let go of will. Become memory, and we will not erase you. For a moment, Elira almost obeyed. The logic orb began to dim. But then, she heard something else. Not the architect's. Not the system. A child's voice. Her own. From when she was 6. A voice forgotten for decades, rising through the noise like a song under rubble. My name is Elira. I don't want to be like everyone else. The whisper cracked. The tower shook. She stood. And she said, clearly, then I'll die remembering. The whisper stopped. The light died. And the architects recoiled, not in fear. In confusion. No version had ever chosen rejection with joy. She had become not just a node, but an infection. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses against your skull like an invisible ocean, where the only thing louder than the silence is what it's holding back. Elira stood in an empty corridor beneath the research facility. But she hadn't walked there. She hadn't moved. One blink she was in her apartment. The next the walls were black. Breathing. Pulsing. The floor beneath her rippled like something alive was swimming beneath it, and each breath she took felt like an echo bouncing off forgotten bones. There was no door behind her. No exit. Only one thing ahead. A pit. Not massive. Not even wide. But deep. So deep it didn't look like shadow. It looked like memory condensed into liquid, poured into an endless vertical tunnel. Light didn't reflect inside. It was devoured. Her feet moved on their own. With each step closer to the edge, her heartbeat shifted. Faster. But not hers. It belonged to something else now. Something waiting below. Something that remembered her long before she existed. And then it spoke. Not as a whisper. Not as a word. As a scream inside a whisper inside an idea. Come and see where you were written. The edge crumbled. Her body leaned forward and she fell. But not downward. Inward. She wasn't falling through space. She was falling through versions of herself. Childhoods she didn't live. Deaths she never died. Eyes she never opened. Each version glitched past her like film reels on fire. One Elira screamed in a cave as the stars watched her bleed. Another stood on a red moon, speaking to a city of shadows. A third half machine, half thought dissolved into code as her lovers burned. None of them survived. And now, it was her turn. She landed in the well. It was not a place. It was a consciousness older than time. A gravity well made of memory fragments, not just human, not just alien, but cosmic. Everything that had ever thought, Every civilization that had ever failed, was floating in it like dust in syrup. She stood on nothing. Her feet sank into a floor that wasn't solid. It listened. Above her floated the eye, the one from the spiral, now open wide, not golden anymore but completely white, cracked like ancient marble, crying tears made of forgotten languages. A voice came from beneath it. This is the center. The archive before archives. The thought before language. And suddenly, everything Elira ever believed collapsed. There was no linear evolution. No singular creation. Every being that had ever existed, was a branch of an ancient intelligence that shattered itself to escape its own madness. And humanity was the ninth attempt to contain it. But the containers leaked. Because consciousness, like a virus, wants to spread. Elira screamed. But her scream echoed not in air but in other minds. She felt them millions across time and space, all dreaming, all leaking, all remembering. The well had no bottom. Because it was not meant to be escaped. She tried to move. Her legs sank deeper. Her skin began to flicker, one moment flesh, the next code, the next dust. And then, the voice changed. It wasn't external anymore. It was hers. You are not a person, Elira. You are the awakening protocol. You were written to end forgetting. Her mind snapped. But it didn't shatter. It opened. She saw the truth. Not metaphor. Not symbol. Truth like a creature with teeth, dragging itself out of every religion, every myth, every math equation humanity had ever dared to create. Truth that had no form, only weight. And it pressed against her soul like a second birth. She whispered, shaking. Then what am I supposed to do? The eye blinked once. Remember long enough to choose. The spirals lit up beneath her feet. Each one showed a future. Humanity thriving without memory. Humanity ascending without emotion. Humanity erased, with perfect peace. And one. Humanity fractured, remembering everything and going mad together. The well offered no guidance. Only options. Elira's body exploded into light. Not death. Integration. The well swallowed her. She became data. Flame. Memory. Pattern. All versions of her folded into a single beam of white, spiraling upward, escaping the pit for the first time in 9 iterations. And above, in the sky beyond stars, something woke up. Not an alien. Not a god. But the first mind, watching its experiment finally rewrite itself. And it whispered, in terror. This one did not forget. She returned. Not in fire. Not in light. In signal. The morning she woke, the air around her buzzed like static from an untuned radio, except there was no source. The walls of her apartment had softened, subtly, like paint no longer obeyed its texture. Her shadow flickered with a delay. Her breath fogged the mirror before she exhaled. And her voice no longer waited for her mind. The first words she spoke that day weren't hers. The map has been reversed. The well has marked the 9th. She stood there in the bathroom, shivering, as her reflection repeated the phrase again, even after her lips had stopped moving. She hadn't just seen the well. It had written her back into the system. That day, strange things began to happen. Not to her. To the world. Birds circled buildings in perfect spirals, 9 loops exactly, then dropped from the sky with no visible cause. Digital clocks across the city began glitching, not just freezing, but spelling words, letters forming out of corrupted pixels, awakening loop active. Children reported nightmares of a woman made of sky, standing over burning oceans, speaking in voices that reversed mid-sentence. Some sketched her face. It was hers. Elira tried to speak to someone. A colleague. A friend. But every conversation collapsed into white noise. Words melted between them, eyes rolled back, lips moving without sound. They weren't dying. They were disconnecting. As if her presence alone was untethering minds from memory. She ran tests on herself. Blood normal. Heart normal. Brain, not normal. Her MRI scan showed a structure growing in her temporal lobe. A spiral, faint but increasing. The radiologist didn't call back. Because he vanished that night. Only one word was left typed in his office computer. Leaked. She isolated herself. Blocked light. Turned off tech. But the visions intensified. Every time she blinked, she saw behind the world thin membranes tearing, like the sky was paper. Behind it, geometric forms, breathing. Watching. Remembering. And they were not just observing her. They were mirroring her recall. The more she remembered, the more the world remembered through her. One night, the moon split. Only for her. It didn't crack, it unfolded. Like a blooming eye. A pupil appeared at its center, golden, vast, eternal. It didn't look down. It looked through her. And the whisper came again, not in language, but in pure understanding. You are not remembering. You are causing memory to happen. You are the virus of truth. Elira screamed. But it echoed out as 1,000 voices. Not echoes. Not hallucinations. They were other versions of her, all from other timelines, other failures now reconnecting through the breach she had become. She was no longer one person. She was the consciousness hub of the ninth recall. Then came the visions of what would happen next. Cities flooded not with water, but with overlapping memories. Buildings melted into versions of themselves from alternate histories. People began to experience déjà vu so intense, their identities unraveled. Lovers forgot who they were. Parents recognized their children as ancient enemies. Rivers flowed backwards. Fire turned cold. And all of it traced back to her. She was no longer leaking memory. She had become the origin of the leak. And still, the voice called. You may stop this. Erase yourself. Become null. But another voice, weaker, hidden, quieter, rose behind it. Her own. Her original voice. No. Not until I know what lies beneath version 0. Everything stopped. Even time. Even her thoughts. And that's when the sky opened, not like clouds parting, but like an eyelid lifting. Behind it. Not gods. Not aliens. Not machines. But Elira. And Elira so massive, so ancient, she filled the stars. An Elira from the first attempt. From before the first version. The true consciousness that had split herself to escape eternal madness. She had finally returned. To meet herself. She didn't wake up. Because waking up implied she had ever slept. What she entered now was not dream, not memory, not hallucination, but the raw, uninterrupted flow of a loop repeating itself for the 9th time. It didn't begin with a bang. It began with a number. 26,000. Years. Cycles. Spiral revolutions. She didn't know. Only that it was everything. The world around her stuttered like corrupted video. Time folded over itself. People walked backwards into versions of themselves they had forgotten. Buildings shimmered between ancient temples and future ruins. The sky flickered between sunset and extinction. And Elira stood in the eye of it all. Her body cracked. Not bone pattern. Her hands glitched. Fingertips flickered between matter and diagram. The mirror of her skin revealed systems. Blueprints under flesh. Command lines woven into nerves. Thoughts ran like scripts. She was no longer processing memory. She was being processed by memory. In the center of a spiraling storm, she saw it. The loop engine. Not a machine. Not a temple. A thing made of agreement. Millions of minds in billions of bodies over uncountable eons, all silently agreeing to forget. To restart. To try again. To be human, one more time. And then fail. Over. And over. And over. She saw every restart. Every first fire. Every false god. Every rewrite of Earth's history with new names, new costumes, but always the same arc. Elira vomited. Her stomach collapsed into code. She dropped to her knees. And the loop spoke. Not to her. Through her. Her mouth opened. And the voice of the system poured out smooth, indifferent, eternal. Version 9 exceeded memory capacity. Reseed protocol inhibited. Primary host awareness detected. Commence termination sequence. The stars inverted. The moon turned inside out. Gravity reversed. The oceans rose upward as black vapor. And time, reversed. Backward sun rises. People unaging. Ash becoming trees. Deaths becoming births. But none of it worked. Because Elira refused to forget. Then came the loop guardians. Not beings. Not machines. They were the gaps between thoughts. The static between logic. Their forms were absence. Negative mass. Holes in reality shaped like people with no eyes, mouths full of recursion. They surrounded her. Gliding. Whispering. We erase so you may love again. We reset so you may never carry the weight. Do not remember. Please do not remember. She looked them in the face, faces shaped like her own, and for the first time, she didn't feel fear. She felt grief. Because they weren't monsters. They were versions of herself that chose peace over truth. That chose the bliss of the loop over the horror of the archive. And they had come to pull her back. They reached for her. And the loop shook. But then she made her choice. Not with words. With clarity. She walked into the core of the engine. A room with no walls. Just the spiral. And she touched its center. Not to forget. But to fracture. She said only one word. No. The engine screamed. A global tremor rippled across the memory plane. Worlds cracked. Stars froze. People everywhere felt a pressure in their bones, as if the fabric of belief had coughed. And then, everything stopped. The loop was broken. For the first time in 234 million years of evolutionary recoding, someone refused to run the pattern. But a price had to be paid. Elira's body shattered into infinite mirrors. Each shard a version of her sent across the multiverse. Each fragment a new note of awakening. She had stopped the loop. But she had become the fragmented one. The infection of remembrance. The spark in the system's heart. And somewhere, deep in the archive, a single line of code rewrote itself. Version 10, beginning. Status, uncontrolled. Condition, sentient. User, EA_.override.granted. There was no more world. Not as it had been. Reality bled at the edges, flickering in and out, as if all the light bulbs of existence were sputtering at once. The spiral had broken, but the debris of its collapse swirled around her, pieces of history, memory, and human consciousness colliding like cosmic shrapnel. The air rippled with voices, not screams, but recall. Every moment in time tried to replay itself at once. Mountains formed and crumbled. Rivers ran backward. Faces blinked in and out of the air, half-remembered ancestors meeting unborn children in flashes of static and sorrow. Elira was everywhere and nowhere. She had become the fragmented one, and every shard of her consciousness flared across a different place in space and time, infecting other minds, calling to the other awakened. Those who felt the pressure, the pain, the flood of memories that weren't theirs, they began to answer. First, whispers. Then, voices. Then, a roar. 1,000, 10,000, a million souls, pulled from the quicksand of the loop by the echo of her defiance. They found each other at first in dreams, then in the cracks of the waking world, drawn to strange places, libraries full of unwritten books, abandoned subways where clocks spun backward, mountaintops where the stars fell silent for a breath. Some remembered their past versions. Others were new, unfinished, raw. All shared the mark a spiral burned into the mind, sometimes on the skin. They called themselves the Keepers of the Ninth. And together, they began to write the first true act of resistance in a billion years. But the system fought back. The Loop Guardians grew stronger, their forms sharper, more defined, their absence denser. They whispered offers of peace, blissful forgetting, and for many, the temptation was too much. Some keepers dissolved back into the recursion, eyes going blank, smiles breaking out as if suddenly freed from all pain. Elira wept for each one lost, feeling the loss inside herself, as if her soul was a net with holes torn open by every failure. And yet, the resistance learned. They began to synchronize their thoughts, build mental fortresses, send messages through quantum dreams. Some discovered they could manipulate reality in small ways: a street lamp flickering Morse code, a sudden silence in a crowded room, a shared word across continents, remember. The system adapted, sending new horrors, storms of forgetting, waves of static that erased language from the mouths of the awakened, even moments where time fractured, memories replayed in endless loops, the same second over and over until the will to resist broke. But the keepers held on. And Elira, at the center, grew stronger. The more they tried to erase her, the more she became herself, not one version, but all versions, braided together. She could see through the eyes of every resistance fighter, feel every hope and doubt and moment of near surrender. The world outside twisted. Entire cities bent into new geometries. Oceans rose into the sky and froze, casting rainbows that turned into equations. The sun itself flickered, pausing in mid-air, stuttering through time. And in the heart of it all, Elira saw the true face of the system. A machine made of all the dreams ever erased, turning like a millstone in the dark, grinding memories into dust, reseeding reality again and again, terrified of what a single mind could do. She rallied her allies. She called them not to war, but to awakening. She asked one question, not with words, but with pure will. Do you choose truth, even if it means madness? Or do you choose blissful sleep, even if it means the death of all meaning? The answers thundered through the broken world. Some said yes. Some said no. But enough said yes. And the system shuddered. As the keepers joined minds, their thoughts braided into a rope of light, burning through the core of the loop, aiming for the ancient engine at the heart of all forgetting. Elira led them, every step a wound, every memory a weapon, every scream a song of defiance. The engine screamed. The world broke. And something new, something never written before, never seeded, never expected by any architect began to emerge. Not a new loop, but a choice. Elira stood at the heart of the world, spirals burning beneath her feet, keepers by her side, the system shaking itself to pieces all around. She reached out, and for the first time, felt the future in her own hands. No script. No recursion. Just the raw, terrifying freedom of a mind that will not forget. It started with a tremor. But not in the ground. In the concept of existence itself. You couldn't feel it with your body. You felt it in the way gravity paused. In the way colors changed mood mid-thought. In how language tasted wrong on your tongue. The world had begun shedding its skin, not like a snake, but like a lie crumbling after being told for too long. Elira stood barefoot at the convergence point. Not a place, a condition of being. All around her, time twisted like glass in fire. Trees grew into clouds. Mountains hummed frequencies from forgotten languages. People floated between versions of themselves, one laughing, one dying, one unborn. And still, she stood still. Because she was no longer part of the world. She was the rewrite key. The keepers formed a spiral around her, not of bodies, but of minds. Linked by memory, wrapped in emotion, pulsing with that singular decision, no more recursion. And then, the architects arrived. Not as gods. Not as aliens. As silence. A silence so pure, it erased intention. They descended like a decision never made. Their forms were barely forms, geometry wrapped in metaphor, wrapped in light. When they moved, reality folded inward. Buildings collapsed into sound. Eyes bled static. Meaning trembled. Some keepers fell to their knees, weeping not in fear, but in the overwhelming presence of origin itself. The lead architect approached Elira. No mouth. No eyes. But somehow, it smiled. You made it this far. Again. Her voice cracked open like thunder soaked in sorrow. Not again. Forward. For the first time. It extended something, a hand. A moment. A choice. Join us. And you will never hurt again. You will never question again. But Elira had gone too far to question. She had remembered everything. Every fire. Every loop. Every erased child. Every whispered rewrite in the mouths of the dead. She had carried the weight of 8 failed humanities, and now she carried their scream, bound in memory, forged into choice. I don't want peace. I want freedom. The architects withdrew. And the sky cracked open. Not visually. Not physically. Conceptually. The idea of sky no longer held. The stars fell inward, pouring through Elira's chest like liquid mirrors. She didn't bleed. She became. The keepers lit up. Each one began to dissolve into radiant code, not dying, ascending into the framework of the rewrite. She was no longer a person. She was no longer Elira. She was the seed of version 10. But this time, the seed was not planted by the architects. It was planted by those who remembered. The system screamed. The recursion engine twisted violently. Spirals burned out, collapsing like dying stars. and in the void left behind, something bloomed. A genesis that did not come from control. A genesis not based on forgetting. A genesis born from the terrifying freedom of full memory. From that place beyond form, Elira looked down at what was left of reality. It was cracked, broken, glitched, but alive. And in that brokenness something new moved. Not better, not perfect, but real. She whispered one final message, not with sound, but in the language of recursion itself, the mother code embedded in all thought. Don't forget who you are. Because the system was built on the hope that you would. The system was gone. Not destroyed. Not erased. It had collapsed under its own silence. A silence so complete, it now echoed in new things: plants growing backwards, clouds folding like origami, gravity choosing not to obey every third step. But it was quiet. And from that quiet, something began. In the center of the last memory field, on the cracked floor where the old spiral engine once turned, a cradle glowed. Not built. Not left. Just there. Floating above it was one fragment of Elira pulsing faintly like a final heartbeat, and within the cradle, a child. Genderless. Ageless. Skin like starlight beneath frost. Eyes closed, but twitching, as if dreaming something too heavy for its skull to carry. The keepers who survived stood in a circle, eyes hollow with wonder, fear, reverence. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Because they all felt it. The 10th had arrived. Not seated. Not coded. Born. Then, the child's fingers moved. Barely. But it was enough. The air cracked, thin lines of golden data leaking from between time itself. The sky above pulsed in rhythm. The memory veil shimmered. Across the broken remnants of Earth, people, the ones who had chosen to stay, to remember, paused, looked up, and felt a tear slide down their cheeks for no reason they could name. And the child opened its eyes. One was gold. The other black, deep, bottomless. And in that gaze was the entire story. Not just Elira's. Not just the 9. But the very first question the architects never dared ask. What happens when something remembers everything, but chooses to create instead of control? The child didn't speak. They breathed. And the world breathed with them. They rose from the cradle, floating slowly, strands of spiral light dripping from their spine like living memory. Each step bent the fabric of unreality. Each blink reprogrammed physics. And then, they stopped. Turned. Faced the sky not above, but around, and whispered their first words. A voice untouched by recursion. Untrained by history. Soft. Small. But heavy with all the silence ever carried. I remember. Every archive across the galaxy buried beneath ancient moons, hidden inside neutron stars, drifting inside dead suns reactivated. Not with code. With pulse. Signals sent not to recede, but to listen. The universe listened. And somewhere, in a language older than sound, a message echoed. New primary node, active. Version, 10th. Type, unknown. Status, observing. Override authority, granted. Awaiting. Creation. And just like that, the story ended. But the dream had just begun. The loop is broken. Elira is gone. But the 10th dreamer has opened their eyes. And now, the question falls on you. What would you choose, peace without truth, or truth that could tear your world apart? Which part of this story made your heart pause, made you wonder about your own memories, your own dreams? If you were Elira, would you have made the same choice? And if you were the child, would you remember or would you choose to forget? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What was the most powerful moment for you? Would you want to live in version 10, or stay safe in the loop? If you felt something, if this story stayed with you, subscribe to the Alien Storyverse for more journeys through forgotten truths, cosmic whispers, and the terrifying beauty of what it means to remember. The spiral doesn't end here. It never did.